So today we're going to do something which I've not yet done on my channel before, and I've basically made a video where I'm reviewing only new releases. So new releases basically from this year, not all from the last month. So I've got three to talk about, so come and join me and find out what I read and what I thought about them. Okay, so as part of my reading new releases, I thought that we would actually open this one together because that'd be kind of fun. Now obviously I know what it is. I'm very excited about this one. I'm really lucky because we've had releases from two of my favourite writers this month. So let's get into it. I will give Waterstones the fact that they do wrap their books really well. Anybody got any ideas what it is yet? It is Jane Casey's new book, Everything She Didn't Say. Okay, so you've just seen me unwrap the first book that we're going to talk about, which is Jane Casey's Everything She Didn't Say. So I haven't done a reading vlog. I'm just going to talk about these books after the fact of me reading them, simply because life has been so busy in the last couple of weeks that I don't really have the opportunity at the moment to get filming equipment out when I like to sort of do a reading vlog and film my opinions on these every single day. Plus it's been so hot here in the UK. I've been a sweaty mess most of the time, and I've been walking around my house not wearing many clothes, so it probably wouldn't be really good if I was trying to film on YouTube looking like that. So let's get to the book. I was very excited for this to come out. I really enjoy Jane Casey's work. She is known for writing a police detective series, which the main star is Maeve Kerrigan. And I believe there's 12 books in that series, and then there's a couple of unofficial books around it. So I've read every single one of those books other than the final one, which I'm kind of saving. And this one is a standalone. So she does have two other standalone novels. I have not yet read them, but this is the latest one from this year. And again, this is following a police detective who is trying to unravel a mystery. So we basically have two women, Ruth and Moira, and or Maura, I'm not really sure how to say it, Maura, and it's set in Ireland. So basically, Ruth is found covered in blood, but it's not her blood, and Maura is missing. And our police detective has to try and understand, why was Ruth there? What happened? Where has Maura gone? And Ruth has her own tale, but she's not exactly, as you would put it, she's not a reliable narrator throughout this. So basically, this detective has to try and unpick this crime. Now, I thought that the general story was interesting. From the start, the way it opened, I was like, okay, this is interesting. I want to know what happens. I want to know, I couldn't unpick what was really going on. And as the book sort of went on, any theory that I was kind of thinking of, the police detective was thinking as well. So then I was sort of thinking, well, this is probably not the answer, because he wouldn't have been thinking the answer halfway through the book, would he? So when we got to the end, I thought the twist was quite good, and I thought the ending was quite good. So from a sort of mystery thriller perspective, where if you like detective, crime thrillers, I think you would actually quite like this. What made this fall down for me was I didn't like, there was sort of a forced relationship that I felt that the author was trying to force between the detectives and one of the female, well, she may have been a victim or she might not have been a victim, they're not really sure at the time, but they're sort of trying to force this kind of relationship between them, and I didn't really agree with that, because I thought it was really unprofessional, and I couldn't really understand, I didn't understand the chemistry that the author was trying to introduce between these two characters. So that relationship, or attempt at it, just did not make sense to me. And it kind of reminded me of the last Maeve Kerrigan book I had read in the series, which was, I think it was A Stranger in the Family, possibly might be the last one I wrote. But basically it bothered me that instead of writing, mainly about the crime, a lot of that book seemed to be about the relationship between Maeve and one of her co-workers. And I like detective novels where they focus on the crime and they focus on the details of the crime and the investigation. I'm not really interested in any kind of love or romance going on in the background between the detectives. If I wanted to read about that, I would read a romance, not a detective story. And the last Maeve Kerrigan book I really marked down for that. I mean, I've given almost all the Maeve Kerrigan books, would give them a 5-star, but that last one really grated on me, that was the kind of approach that was taken. And I felt that the same approach was taken with this. And again, that kind of grated on me because I think that Jane Casey is really, really good at writing really good, procedural criminal stuff. And it's like, stop trying to force relationships with characters and putting that into the book. I'm not interested in it. Please don't do it again. The other thing that I found a little bit odd with this book is that we're mainly interviewing this witness. Well, she could be a witness, she could be a victim, or she could be a perpetrator. We're not really sure who Ruth is, to be honest, throughout this book. So the detective is kind of interviewing her in a variety of different locations. And then it's up to Ruth to then tell the story from her perspective, like what's happened up until that point after the detective asked the question. But instead of sort of reading it like, well, me and Maura did this or whatever, we're kind of like not. So it's sort of like, you're settling down to hear Ruth speak, but it's not Ruth's narration almost. It's not her voice giving the narration, I think is like what bothers me. It's sort of like, the kind of narrator that is narrating from a distance and seems to know everything that's happening with everybody. And that to me was a little bit of a weird choice. I would have thought, that we would have had that kind of narration where we're in the interview room and we're looking at all the characters, but then when we're actually asking Ruth to tell her story, I think I would have preferred it if it would have then gone into Ruth's voice and Ruth would be like, well, me and Maura did this or me and Maura did that. And it didn't do that either. So I thought that was an interesting choice. I think generally on the whole, I did enjoy this, but it wasn't everything that I'd hoped that it would be. I had ordered this, obviously, I'd done as a pre-order from Waterstones, so I could have it on the day that it came out, because that is just how much I really enjoy Jane Casey's books. And it just fell a little bit flat for me. So I think on the whole, I would give this a 3.25. I feel like I would have given it a lot more if we hadn't been trying to force that relationship between the detective and the witness, if I'm honest. But anyway, if you have already read that, let me know what you thought in the comments down below, because my friend also really likes Jane Casey books, and I don't think she's read that one, but she had read the last one in the Maeve Kerrigan series that I read, and she quite likes the relationship stuff that's going on between the detectives. So it might just be me. I don't know.
Okay, so the next book I'm going to talk about was gifted to me just a few weeks ago by my partner, and it is Land by Maggie O'Farrell. So this came out in June, and I've seen loads written about this in all the different newspapers. It's been on all kinds of summer best reads list, so I was quite excited to get hold of this. Now, I have only ever read one Maggie O'Farrell book before, which was in April-March time. I read Instructions for a Heatwave, which was a really, really good book about an Irish family in London where the father goes missing, and then the family are all on a mission to find out what happened to the father. And there are some comedic aspects to that book, but I just really enjoyed the way that it was written. I thought that the prose was really good, and it's just like nice contemporary fiction. Really good one to read if you're away on holiday, and I'd recommend that one for right now, actually, while we're having a heat wave in the UK. So yeah, I was excited to read some more Maggie O'Farrell books, and I've heard people say that this is Maggie O'Farrell's best book yet. Now that's obviously hard for me to determine because I haven't read the rest of the books in her back catalogue. However, I would say that I don't find this to be better than Instructions for a Heatwave, but let's get into it. So this book is set in it starts off in 1865 is when it starts off. And in the front here, we have a really nice map. So it's on the west coast of Ireland, on the peninsula. Starts off in 1865. We're basically following a man called Thomas, who is a cartographer, and he works for the British, like for the Redcoats, mapping basically all around the coast of Ireland and documenting all the villages and houses that are there. And then along with him is his 10-year-old son Liam, who is apprenticed to Thomas. And then they belong obviously to their larger family where they have their mother, and then there's 2 sisters and also a brother for Liam. So what's really interesting when we start off in this book is learning about cartography. I didn't really know that much about it, and learning about the methods that cartographers would have used in the 1800s, basically, to measure the land, because they obviously didn't have all the modern day surveying equipment that we have now. So I thought that was really, really, really interesting. And then there was a lot of stuff about, you know, Thomas like kind of resenting having to map the land for the British, because as he's mapping the land for the British, it's sort of showing a history that's not really the correct history in Thomas's eyes. So the British are kind of saying, like, get rid of any settlements where people have died of famine, because they don't basically want to be able to use a previous map and then the new map and see actually how much the famine had wiped out the population, because in part they're to blame for this. And so, Thomas kind of feels like he's writing their version of history in the maps that they're asking him to make for Ireland, and he has a bit of a breakdown over whether or not he should be doing this. So that's sort of the start of the book. Now, I would say that this book is a lot more literary than the previous book that I read. I think that, it's the kind of book where somebody's going to go outside and then we're going to spend like 10 pages discussing every blade of grass and every shadow that falls on the ground, which, to be honest, at the start of the book, when we're trying to describe the area where Thomas is sort of working, I didn't really mind that. But as this book is over 400 pages, that did get a bit wearing, to be honest, as it went on. And it became a bit laborious, to be honest, like a bit tedious to keep reading these really, really, really lengthy, flowery descriptions on stuff. So I think that it showed that Maggie O'Farrell, from the perspective of putting out a literary piece of fiction, she is very, very talented, but it just kind of wasn't entirely my thing. I was interested in Thomas and Thomas's family, and I wanted to see where that story was going. I wasn't really so interested in all the really flowery descriptions, and it felt like it went on loads of major tangents in between the issues that were happening for the family. So that was a little bit of a for me. Now, this book as well, I would say, this is, it's called Land, and it's really about the land. And the sense of feeling that I got from this book when I was reading it is that I felt really small. Like, I felt like a really small, insignificant part of history. And, that feeling is dealt out by this book. And I think, this comes from the fact that whilst we start off in 1865, we actually sort of go all the way back, like a whole millennium, to the piece of land that they're studying, and we have a look at who was living on that, and then we kind of pass through this really, really quick history where century by century we're looking at this piece of land and who was on it and what was happening, to sort of see that actually human beings are but a mere speck, a mere dot on time and on the land. So I think that was really good, that I got that sense of feeling from this book. But again, that also felt like a massive tangent, because I think you get into about 75 pages and then it goes off for about, it feels like 50 to another 75 pages doing this back history, like way before the family that we're actually looking at. It sort of felt a little bit like maybe two slightly different books to me, but never mind. And I've seen this touted as a really good summer read. And I've got to be honest, like, I wouldn't recommend this as a summer read. And the reason for that is I've noticed that a lot of people like short chapters. And if you're like sunbathing by a pool or whatever, and you're kind of having little conversations with people, having a drink, go back to your book or whatever, okay, this book is really hard to do that with. We don't have any chapters in this book. It's split into 4 sections. And like each section is about 100 pages long. So I don't have a problem with that. I personally don't necessarily need chapters. I just wait for a page break before I take a break, but I know other people like chapters. But because this is a really intense book and it's sort of, as I said, quite literary, and I think it's trying to cover some, big topics, like, I think if you only read for like a little bit at a time, you sort of lose out on the sort of, how should I put it, like, those topics like don't necessarily flow together, like, in small little chunks of the book. You have to sort of sit and read for a good amount of time, I'd say about half an hour at a time, to really get a sense of it. That's how I kind of felt when I was reading it. So for one, I would say that sort of makes it maybe not the most ideal book to take to the pool. Secondly, as I said, we are following a family through this book, and they are an interesting family, and I didn't mind the stories around them, but nothing good happens to this family, if I'm honest, and I kind of found it a little bit depressing by the time I got to the end. Thirdly, as I said, this book made me feel really small and really insignificant. So if you're kind of feeling a little bit down in the dumps, again, don't read this if you want to like cheer yourself up. So for me, I personally didn't feel this to be a great summer read. I feel that this is more the kind of book actually that I'd probably want to pick up in the autumn or the winter. Um, yeah, it's not like necessarily the easiest read. So what I would say is I I enjoyed some of the the sense that this book invoked in me, that small feeling. I thought that was really cleverly done, and I liked that. And I kind of liked the idea of studying the land like it was a person and giving it its own history. I thought that was really good as well. And I enjoyed the family that we were following. There were a couple of side characters that I didn't really like there's a priest in here, which, I really, really didn't like. So there were aspects of this that I liked, but it was absolutely nothing like Instructions for a Heatwave. It wasn't the nice, easy-going read that I was expecting with a little bit of, Irish humour in the background. That wasn't really the case. This is actually quite a serious book, I think. And maybe it's just the fact that I wasn't prepared for that when I went into this book. But it does feel like this book is catering for maybe a slightly different audience. So having never read the rest of Maggie O'Farrell's back catalogue, I couldn't say if her books are representative of Instructions for a Heatwave, or if any of them really kind of lean this way. But this is not really contemporary fiction like her other one. I'd say that this is definitely literary fiction. So that being said, as I said, I did find this a little bit tedious at times, and I've got to be honest, if it hadn't been gifted to me, I may have been tempted to do a DNF at certain points on this book because it does go off on tangents. And some of these tangents are not short, though, they're like 40, 50 pages long. However, I understand the literary skill that went into this book, and I can kind of get that from reading it. So I think on the whole, I'm probably going to give this a 3.5 stars. But no, I'm not recommending this to anybody as a light summer read if you go on holiday. Okay, so that's 2 books, and both the Jane Casey book, Everything She Didn't Say, that was published in July just, and Land was published in June. So they're very, very, very new releases. The third one I'm going to talk about is called Nowhere Burning by Catriona Ward. This was actually published in February this year, so it's not as new as the other 2, but I don't believe this is out in paperback yet. And to be honest, we're only in July, so it's only been out about 6 months, so I still class this as a fairly new release. Now, this is a horror book, I would say, and it's got some magical realism in it. And I've never read anything by Catriona Ward before, so this was new. She's a new author to me, and she does have quite an extensive back catalogue from what I've seen of horror type books or suspense thriller type books. And apparently a really famous one she's written was The Last House, or The Lost House on Needless Street, I think it's called. So I've never read that one. But what attracted me to this one is I thought that the actual storyline sounded really good. And it's basically a very, very, very dark version of Peter Pan. Now, I really like a Peter Pan retelling. In fact, I like all the kind of Disney stories that have a dark retelling. I'm really into those. It's just finding a good one is difficult. This is the best Peter Pan retelling that I've ever read. But it's also kind of like, because we're in nowhere, and nowhere is a place like Neverland. But then actually in Nowhere we have a theme park which is kind of meant to represent the physical Neverland that Michael Jackson built. But that's about as far as this goes with Michael Jackson. Like literally that's the only parallel that you could draw there. But yeah, I really, really liked the idea of that. This basically follows a 14-year-old called Riley, and she has, like, her parents are no longer around, so her and her 7-year-old brother Oliver are staying with a family member, but it's not really going well in that accommodation. The family member is somewhat abusive to them, so she escapes. They go into the mountains. So this is set in America. I want to say like around Wichita. I could be wrong. But yeah, so they go off into the mountains and they go searching for this place called Nowhere, where all of these lost children basically go, who have escaped life in the homes that they were in the normal city, because either they're orphans and they're now like in abusive homes, or yeah, they've just decided that they're going to live in the mountains. And the people who live in the nearby town are aware that this group of children are there, but nobody really does anything about it. Nobody tries to, you know, get the police involved and get them to move out, because they're in a really, really difficult location to get to. So yeah, we're following Riley on her journey there and her time spent in there. And then we're also following the point of view of like a reporter guy who is basically wanting to write a news story on this location and the children in this location. And then we're following a third point of view of a man who used to live at nowhere but no longer lives at nowhere. And so the timeline really goes back and forth between all of these three people, and it's a little bit confusing at sometimes to know, like, you know, which time you're actually on about, and even if you're in the present day with some of the things that they're talking about. But towards the end of the book, this all gets tied together. And I think what I thought was really, really good about this book is the moment I became aware of the twist and what the twist was the exact moment that the author was about to reveal the twist. So I worked it out on the page before the twist actually got revealed, and I would say that that's absolutely perfect, and that's obviously what the author intended and wanted you to do. So I actually think that this might be worth a reread, to go back to the beginning now, knowing what the twist is, to see if I can see all the Easter eggs that were obviously being thrown in through the different points of view. But yeah, I thought that this was really good. I'm going to say that this was my favourite out of the three of them, which I don't know that I was expecting that actually. I'm thinking that I thought the Jane Casey was probably going to be my favourite out of these three reads, and it has actually ended up being my least favourite. But this one I do recommend. As I say, this is a horror book. I don't think... One thing I would say is, whilst we are following a group of, well, Riley's 14 and then a lot of the children in this group are younger than her. Whilst we are following this group of children, I wouldn't say that this was a YA book, just in case you were thinking, because, you know, part of the cast in here are so young. Because honestly, the things that these children are going through and the things that they're doing, it is somewhat savage and kind of upsetting at times, because actually they're, you know, doing adult things or living a kind of adult life out here in the middle of nowhere, when really they should be, you know, living the life of a child. So I wouldn't personally recommend this as a YA novel. I do think this is an adult book. Okay, so I think overall I would rate this a 4. I enjoyed reading this one much more than the other two. I actually did look forward to sitting down to reading this one, and I didn't find it tedious in any way whatsoever. It's not quite a 5 for me. I can't really say why. It just hasn't got the 5 feel for me. But I think 4, it's definitely a 4. And it's definitely one that I would recommend if you like horror and you also like kind of like the dark Disney retelling. Like, this one is a good Peter Pan retelling, I think. And yeah, so that's obviously taken me a couple of weeks to film this with all 3 novels, because I've got quite a lot of stuff going on in my life at the moment. But I have been reading some other books in between those books. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try and post a video next week where I do a catch up on all of those books that weren't new releases. But hopefully you've enjoyed this video on these new releases, and I'd love to know in the comments down below if you've read any of these 3 releases, what you thought of them. Did you agree with my point of view on them, or not? Or are you actually looking forward to reading any of these? I'd also really like to know as well, if you know of any other dark Peter Pan retellings, let me know about that in the comments down below. So thanks for watching this video. If you've enjoyed watching it, please give me the thumbs up, and if you'd like to see my future content, please press the subscribe button, and I'll see you soon. Bye!